The case of Jane Dorotik. In this video, I'm going to share with you 8 facts that 48 Hours did not reveal when they did their episode called The Troubled Case Against Jane Dorotik. These facts are very important. It is yet another episode that 48 Hours, when they decide that they're going to spin a case in whatever direction they choose, they cannot do so without omissions. And so I'm just asking you, as somebody who wants to have an opinion about this case, to please just hear the things that they didn't tell you. Just in fairness of justice and for the victim and the victim's family, to include the son of this woman who was convinced that she did in fact murder him. So here's what happened. The guy is a jogger, he's a runner, and they were married for over 20 years, and they had a recent separation, but they got back together, and according to her, everything was fine in the marriage, and he took off running. He didn't come back in the appropriate timing that he would. So, she waited a little longer, thought, well, maybe he's just... But then after a few hours, she's like, okay, something's wrong. She calls the police, and then they go and find his body, and he's got rope around his neck, and he's been murdered. And so they're just like, this is California. Was there some kind, anything could happen. But when they sent in a criminalist who does evaluations of the home, well, that's when they found blood. But it's how they found it that 48 Hours doesn't even tell you. So I'm going to share with you the 8 things that 48 Hours didn't tell you. Now, according to her, as presenting in the 48 Hours episode, here's what happened. There was blood on the ceiling, on the floor, on the bed, on the carpet, in various places. And they said, well, you didn't test every single drop, so therefore you didn't handle stuff properly. Then there was, eventually, in 2020, she was released on a conditional release, but they didn't tell you exactly how she was released or why. And so then eventually, they decide to dismiss the case. Now, I believe that they intended to re-prosecute. They're like, you know what, we're going to dismiss this original charge because she's out on parole. And technically, if you have a life sentence, this is what she had 25 to life, but that's not life without, which means, depending on the state, sometimes in a violent charge sentence, you have to serve 50% before you're even eligible for parole. Sometimes you have to do 85% before you're eligible for parole. But under the 25 to life, she was already eligible for parole. So they're like, you know what, we're going to drop this case and re-prosecute her. Then we're going to shoot for life without. And then she will never be eligible for parole, right? So they dropped the case against her. And then they're like, okay. She's thinking, oh, it's over. Now they believe me. And then they charge her again. But then they eventually decided, of course, they have 48 Hours running episodes, and she's got this group who looks into cases. And so they're like, you know what, we're going to let this case go. And so then they just dropped the case, but not by saying with prejudice. Means at any time they can recharge her, right? Because murder doesn't have, statute of limitations. So maybe they're just waiting for things to die down. Maybe she'll say something stupid and, whatever. But let me get into now the things that they didn't share with you. Now, sometimes in cases where there's obvious guilt and they have very strong evidence, someone in, an investigation team or someone, somehow, some way, they do something stupid. Maybe they withhold evidence from the defense. Maybe they improperly handle evidence that causes it to get thrown out. Not because it's not good evidence, just, because of the specific rules. And there are things that can happen, especially if they withhold something or they misrepresent something. You can actually violate civil rights based on how they handle a case. So she currently has a lawsuit against certain defendants within, the law enforcement force. And I don't know that they didn't violate her rights, but that doesn't mean she's not guilty. So I'm going to share with you now the 8 things that CBS did not tell you, starting with how they discovered that there was blood. So the first walkthrough, they didn't find anything, right? Then there was the criminalist woman who was actually very sweet. So this is a house where people take off their shoes, okay? There's a lot of people who don't allow shoes to be walking outside, and then I actually have that. I have inside shoes and outside shoes. So I take my outside shoes off at the door, and then I put my inside shoes on. But some people, they only wear socks in their house. Well, this is one of those houses that only wear socks. So this woman, as polite as she was, she took her shoes off at the door, okay? And so then she's walking around the bedroom, and she felt a wet carpet. Now, keep in mind, this woman is claiming that droplets of blood on the carpet that they found was from her pet, who had some kind of condition that caused, it to bleed. The problem with that story is, why would you, when your husband's missing, decide to clean blood stains off of your carpet? You're shampooing a carpet when your husband's missing? Like, totally didn't, add up. But anyways, the feeling of wet carpet, immediately she knew this was a cover-up. You have freshly shampooed carpet only by the bed. Because she just walked through that entire room, right? With her socks on. And there was no wet spots but by the bed. And then she saw it. There was missed blood that they failed to clean up. So there was blood on the wall, around the bed. There was, I think it was like some of the stove that it literally leaked. There was so much blood under the carpet and then by the stove, where it went down the brick wall and literally dripped and leaked into the utility room downstairs. So that's how they found that there was blood. Then, of course, there's the blood on the ceiling. And when 48 Hours did their episode, I was just like, all I want to know is what you didn't reveal. Because especially when you're talking about not every single drop of blood was tested, you know how when there's a violent act such as pulverizing somebody, when you hit them, there's high velocity type of blood splatters, and there's going to be probably a lot of drops. So the amount of money it would cost to test every single blood drop, I think would be unreasonable. But so all I wanted to know was, did you test the blood drops on the ceiling? That's all I care about, right? Because I'm sorry, if you've got blood drops of the victim on the ceiling, that can't be done without foul play, yo. Nothing that she described trying to excuse away the blood said anything about why there was blood on the ceiling. Oh, just she didn't know, right? So I just want to know. So I go and I do some digging, and yes, those drops on the ceiling were in fact tested and confirmed to be the victims. And not only that, they tested the consistency of the blood pattern of the drops on the ceiling with one on the wall and around the headboard and the bed, and they were all consistent angles with where he was lying. She attacked him while he was in bed. And so then there was the syringe. Now they do mention the syringe in this episode, but the syringe they mention that has his blood in it, and she's like, she's just, oh, there's another one. I don't know. They talked about she has syringes because she has animals. She goes, you can look in my refrigerator. I'm going to have syringes. And if you do have, livestock and horses or whatever, it's typical that people would have that. But the problem with that whole syringe thing that 48 Hours didn't tell you was, did you know that syringe in the trash can had her fingerprint on it, but her fingerprint was covered in his blood. So literally after she hits him, she's got blood on his blood on her hand, then she picks up the syringe and tosses it in the trash. Like, she did not expect to have any investigation into her. They were going to believe this. He was found, when he went jogging. They're not going to look at her. So she didn't even bother to get rid of the evidence. Then let's go into fact number 3, the rope. So there's a rope. This I think is where the wrongful conviction group took interest was the rope had a male DNA on it, and there was DNA under his fingernails that did not match any of them, So, but fingernail DNA under the fingernail, I mean, that could be anything. But I could see why they took interest in the case. But the problem with that is that they also ignored the fact, oh yeah, that rope that you're claiming that there's somebody else's DNA on it, yeah, that rope is in her bedroom. There was a piece of that same exact rope in her bedroom. Okay. Fact number 4. The tennis shoes were pristine. They had not been used for running. And the way the shoelaces were tied, somebody else tied those shoelaces because they weren't consistent with the way his other shoes were tied. Somebody dressed him and then took him and dumped him there. Fact number 4. Speaking of being dressed after he was killed, did you know, because CBS didn't tell you, there was blood on his body under his shirt. Not on his shirt, under his shirt. So he was attacked when he was not dressed. And then he was dressed. You can't possibly have blood underneath the shirt. So that's why the jury convicted her. There was blood under his shirt. Fact number 5. Did you know that in the truck bed there was a whole bunch of blood that had been washed away? They used the luminol and they saw very clearly they couldn't test it because it had been washed away. There was blood in the back of his pickup. Fact number 6. The tires. They threw out the tires probably because there was maybe some kind of error in how they collected the tire tracks or whatever. But that doesn't mean it wasn't good evidence. The tires, what they didn't tell you in 48 hours was they were mix-matched. And most people don't mix-match their tires because it's not good for the alignment and just in general for your car. You want to have matching tires. I've done that though. I may have one mix-match tire. I think at one time in my life I had 2 matching tires on the front and then a different brand on the back, right? And then at one time I had, a used tire until I could go and get a new tire put on it. I had a mix-match tire. But there were multiple mix-match tires on her truck. And at the scene, there were different brands. And they were exactly matched to that truck. So you have one brand on the left front, another brand on the right front, another brand on the left back, another brand on the right back, or whatever. There was multiple mix-match tires. And the odds and the probability of getting a vehicle to have an exact order of mix-matchness with the same tread wear are in the millions. But yet there it was, and her truck was matched to the mix-match tires exactly. But apparently the handling of that evidence was not sufficient, so they threw it out. Then there is how she was released. And I'm going to go into the whole, was their marriage stable at that time? Because there's a whole backstory there on that one. And yeah, they did have evidence that there was issues. But in 2014, in the state of California, they passed a law about elderly, and it didn't have any exceptions for violent offenses. So I'm sure that, they make sure that this person's stable, they're not causing problems in prison. She already served 20 years. So in the state of California, okay, if you don't get life without, then you're eligible for parole. And some states have 50% where you have to serve 50% if it's a violent offense. Like, a lot of people think, if you're getting sentenced to 10 years, you're going to do 10 years. No. If it's a non-violent offense, then you can get on parole pretty quickly. If you're serving, 25 to life, then it's up to the parole board, and you have to serve a certain percentage of 25 years which normally, unless they changed it from, it's usually 50% for a violent offense, and then some states are 85% to take more, seriousness on violent offenses. So she was already eligible for parole, right? But she got out on a medical, so they have special release, like they had the elderly. They want to release elderly lifers. They passed that in 2014. And if the person has not already had their first initial parole hearing, then they're eligible to be released as under that law, which she was. But then in COVID in 2020, they were evaluating who they should release for, medical reasons. And, she fell in the vulnerability category because she was, in her 70s. And then she was also eligible for the elder release program for lifers. She got 25 to life, right? But she was already served her sentence. So the only way that they could send her back to prison to where she wouldn't get right back out, because she's already been given, she was given parole or conditional release on the most serious charge that they can give her, which is first-degree murder. So what would be the point of recharging her? So then you have, if they get life without, that would be the only way that she would go back to prison and not be released right back out. And I think that they believe because, the people who were getting involved in her case and 48 Hours getting involved and trying to spin it, getting people trying to, try the cops in social media, because they may have made errors in this case. But I just think it's cringy when 48 Hours omits things. Like, if you want to present that you think that somebody's innocent, then absolutely go for that. If the cops are doing, I don't care if a person is guilty. If the cops are doing stuff that's wrong, then that's a problem, because they could be doing that against people that's innocent. And I'm like all for taking into them, right? But here's a lot of times what happens, like cops are convinced somebody's guilty. And because they're convinced they're guilty, they may smudge some evidence or withhold some evidence. Or, they know they might get some jailhouse snitch who's lying or something like that, They're going to cheat because they feel like, the ends justifies the means. And they're like, that's what causes problems in cases. And a lot of times, it can actually lead to somebody who's guilty walking away. But this one's not exonerated, okay? And they're still standing with the position she did it. The evidence is so clear. And 48 Hours can spin whatever they want to spin. But there's other documentary and crime reporters who do more non-biased presentations. And all I'm asking is that people please, if you're going to watch 48 Hours, will you at least check them? Will you at least listen to the defense side, or just go and listen to somebody else presenting it? Because 48 Hours is probably the worst reporter of crimes. They're the worst. In my opinion, they're the worst. So then there's the daughter. And yeah, there's a letter where she was absolutely raging against her dad. And yes, there was problems in the marriage at that time. There was evidence of that also that 48 Hours doesn't mention. I mean, I don't know. I could just go on and on about various things that there was evidence that they withheld. I just think it's wrong. I think it's, there is a valid lawsuit. I'll show you here. It is in I'll put a link in the description of this video. The Dorotik versus County of San Diego et al. Kathy Ann Bencivenjo is the judge. It is case number 323-CB-01045-440 Civil Rights and Other Civil Rights. It is a 1983 Civil Rights Act, which is civil action for deprivation of rights. So somewhere along the way, they, aired in some way or another. It is an active case, and it is on October. There's going to be a hearing. There was a docket hearing for October 23rd, 2024. The status conference is advanced to October 10th, which is 5 days away, at 2:30 p.m. by Zoom. Status conference set for 10/10/2024 at 2:30 p.m. before Magistrate Judge David L. Leshner. And so, yeah, that's the current status on her lawsuit. But that doesn't mean that she's innocent. I'm just asking people, please check CBS 48 hours. Don't take what they say as valid.